I'd like to thank Samantha Annette, Jerry Kennedy, Jeremy, Robin, Loretta McAllen, and Les Reynolds, who either sent me GoFundMes or contributed in another way that deserves honorable mentions. Remember, YouTube hardly monetizes any of my videos. I think it's because I use the F word too much, so I rely off the GoFundMes and any other kind of contributions to make this my job. And I love doing it as much as you guys seem to love hearing the stories, so I certainly appreciate you guys. It keeps me going. So let's get into the story. This is my 5 years in federal prison, part 18. And I had gotten out of Victorville unscathed somehow. Somehow I'd juggled my debts and gotten out of there without anybody hurting me. Barely. I barely made it out of there, but I did. And Jamie Lake had burned me once again. You know, he promised he was going to release 1,000 off his books, and then I don't know if he checked in or if he just went for a transfer in the morning, but whatever the case, I didn't get paid. And I did run into Jamie Lake later on in my life story. And it's very interesting what happened with that, but we'll get to that. That is much later in my story, and we'll get to it at another point. And people have asked, you know, they say, well, what about withdrawal? Were you going through withdrawal? Because I was doing heroin at Victorville. At my worst at Victorville, I was doing about 1 gram a day. And that didn't go on for that long. That's $400 a day. And I could only sustain that for so long. Right before I had left, I was probably doing, I don't know, a 50 paper a day, which is like a 0.1 of a gram. And I've had habits on the street where it's up to 11 grams. I was on methadone when I was doing 11 grams a day, but typically when I'm strung out, I'm doing 2 or 3 grams of black tar a day. 0.1 of 1 gram is hardly anything. I mean, you get a headache when you're kicking that little. You definitely get the hot and cold flashes, and you don't feel well. You get the skin crawling, and it's hard to sleep. But it wasn't anything too bad. Maybe a little diarrhea, but it wasn't like a full-blown heroin kick. And so I had now pissed off the CO when I got to Terre, Haute Penitentiary in Indiana, and he put me on death row, which is the hole. And I was seeing all these crazy pencil etching rants and raves of Timothy McVeigh. Now, I don't know if it was actually Timothy McVeigh. It's quite possible that someone was just bored in the hole and they just wanted to write extremist stuff and sign it McVeigh just to fuck with people's heads. That's completely possible. But it was also possible that he did write that, and that possibility alone was pretty creepy. So, and then to make it even worse, like I said, there weren't lights in that cell. So at night I would just see the outside stadium lights of the prison kind of softly illuminate the cell, and I'd see these crazy pencil writings all over, and it was really creepy. You know, I'm not like a big ghost believer or anything, but it's like weird. You're already by yourself, so you're in your head, and then you're kind of just stuck with these weird writings. And this hole, incidentally, in Terre Haute, Indiana, is where I came across Gucci Mane a few years after this, when I was doing a transfer to get a liver biopsy, and I had to go to a place that was right around Terre Haute Penitentiary, some liver specialist. They had transferred me there. And that's where I crossed paths with him. Same hole. But in this particular, when I was there this time, I spent the majority of my day working out by myself. I talked to myself a lot, too, in the hole. Some holes have showers in them and some don't. You know, sometimes they have to actually escort you to the shower once or twice a week. But some of the older penitentiaries actually have showers in the cell, and this one did, but they didn't have shower shoes. You know, shower shoes are just like flip-flops that you wear so that you don't pick up some weird fungi infection from, you know, so many people are so filthy in prison. You wear shower shoes when you shower. And if you're at a really political yard, one of the rules that you have to adhere by is that you have to wear boots to the shower. You wear boots to the shower, and then when you get to the shower, you take the boots off, you put the shower shoes on, you shower with the shower shoes on, you get out, and then you have to put your boots back on. And the reason that that's a politic in And one of the political rules in some of these rougher prisons is because when you're wearing flip-flops, you're essentially, immobilized, and people like can just take off on you, kind of get stuck on the floor. You can't back people up. They want you to be suited and booted, so to say, at all times. So if you're at a really rough prison, you're going to have to wear shoes or boots to the shower and then switch into your shower shoes. Some of the softer prisons I've been at, it's not like that. Victorville was definitely like that. So when I would shower at the Terre Haute in the hole there, I would have to take the tops of the trays for the meals, because they put meals through a meal slot. I remember at Terre Haute, they actually fed really well. They give you a salad each, not good salad, like rabbit food lettuce, but they would give you like this little donut with like a cherry filling on every meal, and the food there was a little bit better than the other prisons that I had been to. Now, the Federal Bureau of Prisons is on a national menu, but there's like 3 or 4 different menus, and I was used to the one that the West Coast was doing. MDCLA and Victorville had the same menus, but on the Midwest it was completely different. They'd actually give you pork chops once a month, and I remember like really loving the pork chops. So when I would shower, though, they would put these meal trays through the slots, and I'd take the covers off, and I'd have to like stand on these covers to take a shower, because I didn't want my feet on those disgusting shower floors. And I don't know, it's just something that I remember, just a small detail. I spent the majority of my days working out, talking to myself, talk to myself a lot when I'm in solitary confinement. I'll just have like weird conversations. I'll be like, hey man, you're weird. I'm like, I know I'm weird. You're weird too. I'm not as weird as you. You're fucking gay. I'm not gay. You're gay. What if we're both gay? What if we're gay for each other? We're the same person. And then you just kind of start losing your mind a little bit. And like I said, I'd look off into the Indiana wilderness and imagine Axl Rose being a little juvenile delinquent running around, and all the lyrics that were stuck in my head from Guns N' Roses, growing up. And that's pretty much what my experience was like on death row in Terre Haute USP. It's not like I saw other inmates. You're by yourself in a fairly big cell, and usually when you're in the hole, I've been to the hole in like 5 or 6 different prisons throughout the country, you hear people yell all day. It's very loud in holes because people are just going crazy. You're just hearing people scream and say annoying stuff because people are so bored. But on death row, it was completely different. You could hear a pin drop. I mean, these were people that had surrendered to the idea that they were about to die in prison. And I never saw anybody else. I was just kind of by myself in my cell. I was there for a month, talking to myself, working out, reading. And finally, one morning, they said, okay, come on, we're going to Oxford. So we got in the bus, and we started heading towards Wisconsin. Now, this, I believe, is northern Wisconsin. I think it's at the top of the state. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it's northern Wisconsin. And it's in the middle of, like a forest type area. It's about an hour north of Madison, I want to say. And we pull up to this prison. The bus ride was cool. I was with a couple norteños from California. This was one of the only medium security prisons in the entire BOP that they could actually go to. And there were Southsiders there, and they were programming together at that moment. That was about to change very quickly, and we'll get into that. But these norteños and I were talking, and, there were 2 of them on the bus. And they were telling me how sweet they heard that Oxford was. And I was saying that I heard the same thing. And we end up getting to this prison, and just like I had heard and been told, looks like a college campus. It was beautiful. There was green lawn out front, very different than the desert scape of Victorville. And instead of the gray, very prison-like buildings that Victorville and some other prisons I've been to have been, this was red bricks, because it used to be a boarding school for troubled boys or whatever in the 70s. And it was just a very nice looking place. Now, they did have gun towers there, and that was and they had the razor wire, but that was like the only signs that it was an actual prison. Besides that, it really did look like a college. It looked like the kind of college that I used to see in Boston. So we pull into this place, and we have to do the intake like you do at any prison. And we probably takes like 4 or 5 hours, and they tell us where we're going to go. Now, the way that Oxford's set up is there's an upper area with, I think, 8 units, and then there's a lower area. So it's called up the hill or down the hill. Each unit is named after a county in Wisconsin. They have like Adams unit, they have Dane unit, and these are all different counties in Wisconsin. And I think that I was going to Dane because I was going to RDAP, and Dane was like the pre-RDAP building. It's like, if you're gonna take the drug and alcohol program, you go to this building. So I went into this place, and it was like an L-shaped structure. So it was like one long hallway, then another long hallway in an L shape, and then there's a huge TV room. There's some computer terminals, and there's group showers. Now at Victorville, they were individual showers. They were actual stalls. This was group showers, like the kind you see in Half Baked, you know, when the guy drops the soap. That's what kind of showers they had at this place. And there's like a CO station right in the middle where the L starts. So, you know, one hallway is right here. There's a cop station, and then there's another L. And I go in there with my bedroll and everything, and the CO says, he's like, hey, this is what cell you're in. They're on lockdown right now, so just go to your cell, make your bed, get yourself situated, but you're not allowed to do anything. There can't be any movement right now. I was like, okay. So I walk down the hallway, and I'm looking around, and all the cell doors are open, and there's like people running around from cell to cell, and people playing cards, and I see just everyone's having a good time. I'm like, what the fuck? This doesn't look like a lockdown. Now, at this prison, there's not toilets in your cell. There's a communal bathroom. So they don't lock the cell at night. It's just the doors always kept open. So in a lockdown, they don't even lock the cell doors. They just leave the doors open because people have to go to the bathroom. So everybody's just kind of like sneaking into each other's cells. It was like the craziest thing I'd ever seen. At Victorville, if you're locked down, it's like, you know, it's like you're legitimately locked inside of a cell. Here, everybody seemed like it was a free-for-all, and everyone was having a good time. So I go to my cell, I check the little card that he gave me, and I see where I'm going. And I look at my cellie, and he's like this little Hispanic guy with a gold grill. He's like, hey, bro, what's up? I'm Taco. I was like, hey, you're Mexican. He's like, I'm Latin, man, not Mexican. I was like, all right. I don't think I can cell up with you. He's like, what, are you on that racial California kind of stuff? Is that what you're on? I'm like, are we allowed to cell up outside of our race? He's like, oh, yeah, absolutely. I was like, holy fuck. So I'm like, okay, whatever. Take his word for it. Start making my bed. And, you know, some other guy comes in, this other Norteño dude. He's like, hey, what's up? He's like, this is your cellie, Taco. He's like, tell him about how you like girls shitting on your face, Taco. He's like, I don't like talking about that kind of stuff, man. And I'm like looking at him. He's like, yeah, you're in for a treat with this guy. So his name was Taco. He's doing I think he's doing like 16 years for a gun and meth, something like that. And I will say this, he had like one of the best porn collections in the entire prison. So I'm talking to the Norteño, and I'm like, hey, am I allowed to cell up with him because he's Mexican? Like, what's up? He's like, oh, dude, yeah, this is Wisconsin. Like, there's none of that here. People don't care. Now, one thing that I hadn't brought up in the past video that I should have is when I was at Victorville, there was a guy named Brian from, I think it was from Montana. Yeah, it was from Montana. And Brian got 30 years because a guy named Cowboy had told on him. He cooperated on him, testified against him, the whole 9 yards. And when I found out that I was going to Oxford, I told a bunch of people at Victorville that that's where I was going. And Brian had come up to me and he had said, he's like, hey, the guy that, like, the star witness on my case is out at Oxford. Now, there's no PC yards in federal prison. I think there's a couple, like, really high-end snitch yards, like, you know, there's one in Arizona, and then the Terre, Haute USP, I think, has become kind of a dropout yard because there's so many people are checking in all over. They had to start making these yards, just kind of like how there's SNY in the state. But then there's certain yards that have the RDAPs. They have the drug and alcohol programs, and those yards seem to be, people walk around with blinders on. There's sex offenders at Oxford. There's rats at Oxford. And there's like no paperwork checking. There's no politics. There's no nothing like that. Prisons that have the drug and alcohol program, because they incentivize inmates to take the class and to get a year off. They incentivize inmates with the year off to take this class. They tend to be softer yards. Even though that one place in Herlong, people were selling up with black guys and getting stabbed, for the most part, yards that have the RDAP program are considerably softer than yards that don't have it. So when I was at Victorville and Brian had told me that Cowboy was at Oxford, he's like, dude, I have paperwork on this guy. Do you think that's my sea crack, and I'm not farting. I promise that's what it is. He's like, do you think you can hoop some of this dude's dirty paperwork, and whoever's running that yard, just give it to him. This dude needs to get dealt with, man. He gave me 30 years. And Brian was my friend. Like, we played poker all the time. He was a good guy. He just had a daughter, like, right before this guy told on him. He got 30 years for selling meth. And I guess this guy cowboy got like 6 years, 7 years, something like that. And this other guy got 30, and Cowboy was like doing bigger stuff. And that tends to be how stuff in the feds goes down. It's like the guy always doing worse stuff tells on somebody and then gets less time. So I said, yeah, definitely. I'll bring this paperwork there, and I'll put this dude out there. I got you, Brian, for sure. He's like, okay, cool. I'll bring it to Chow. This is back at Victorville when he'd give. I just forgot to tell you guys about it. So he brings me at Chow. He brings me his paperwork. It's like 9 pages of like a discovery where like all this stuff's highlighted about how this guy testified against him. I'm like, how do you expect me to get that to Oxford? He's like, dude, up your ass, man. Hoop it. I'm like, that's like 9 pages. That shit's like, it has the girth of a dildo. I'm not putting that up my ass. He's like, really, bro? This guy gave me 30 years and you can't put this up your ass? It's not a dildo, dude. It's bad paperwork. Fold it up. So I had to like practice various times and make scrolls. Anyway, I ended up bringing this stuff. So I forgot to say that. I had to go on this entire journey on Con Air with this thing of paperwork that was about, it was about that thick. It was like actually thick, and it went up my ass. So I bring this bad paperwork on Cowboy to Wisconsin, and now we're on lockdown, I guess. I mean, and I'm with Taco. He's like, yeah, man. And like later that night, so then they call lights out, and even though we're on lockdown, they still call lights out, and like the lights go off in the hallway, and we can still get up to go to the communal bathroom whenever we want. So I'm like, sitting on my top bunk with like my legs dangling off of them, and I'm like, so Taco, what's this shit about you like getting you like girls shitting on your face? He's like, yeah, it's my thing, man. I'm like, that's disgusting. Like, you actually get poop on your face? He's like, no, man. Nah. I have them do it on a glass table, and I just watch it. I love seeing it come out of their ass. I'm like, holy fuck. I just kind of like sat up in my bunk just thinking to myself, like, man, I have got to get a cell change in the morning. There's no way I can live with this dude. This guy is something else. So the next day, I go to Chow. It's really cold there. It's just starting to snow. And they give you like parkas, and they give you warm clothes. And I see, I see some white guys at Chow at breakfast. I go up to them and I'm like, hey man, I'm Ryan. I'm from California. Hey, what's up, man? Typical, like, fake prison shit. Hey, what's up, dog? Da-da-da. And I'm like, hey, who's got the keys here for the whites? For the woods? Who's got the keys? And they're like, keys? They're like, homie, you're in Wisconsin. We don't have anything like that. I said, okay, all right. Well, I have bad paperwork on somebody. Who do I give it to? I mean, if there's nobody that's, like, calling the shots for the woods here, what do you do when someone has bad paperwork? And they're like, dude, like 70% of this yard has bad paperwork. This is like one of those spots because it's a nice prison. They have weights. They have the RDAP program. And I'm there for the RDAP program. That's like my sole purpose. I just changed my release address to get out there. But nobody's checking paperwork. Nobody wants to politic. It's just everybody's kind of staying in their lane because it's a nice place. There's a lot of lifers there, and everybody just wants to like do kicked back time. There's a lot of Italian mob guys there too. For some reason, Oxford is like a magnet for like some of these mafia guys that fell of the Rico cases in the 70s. So there's a lot of like these good fella type guys there that at this point are just old men, and they're just carrying out the end of their life sentences. So, I mean, I'm still going up. I gave Brian my word, even though my word's poo-poo. I gave Brian my word that I would take care of it for him. So I keep telling everyone, I'm like, hey, do you know who Cowboy is? They're like, yeah. I'm like, hey, do you know he's a rat? I have paperwork on him. And I'm like showing people this. People are like, whoa, I don't want to see that. I'm like, what do you mean you don't want to see that? This guy gave my friend 30 years. And like, I'm like, God, where am I? This is like it was like a weird adjustment, you know? And I would come to find out later, Oxford had some of the most solid guys I've ever done time with, but people kept their circles very tight. It wasn't like the fake social atmosphere of Victorville, and it's still racially divided there. The whites sit with the whites, Mexicans sit with Mexicans, the Norteños and Serranos sat together, and then they have all these various Midwest gangs, the Latin Kings, Latin folk, vice lords, gangster disciples, Blackstone, which they have out here, but they had them out there too. They had Bloods and Crips out there too, and there were a lot of different skinhead gangs, stuff like that. So I'm going around to all the white people, and I'm trying to like find somebody that cares about this guy being a rat. Nobody seems to care. Finally, I meet a cool guy that's from California, a white guy from California. And I tell him, I'm like, hey, man, my name's Ryan. Look, I got bad paperwork on this guy, Cowboy, and nobody seems to care about it. He's like, yeah, nobody's going to care. Everyone just wants to stay here. Look how nice this place is. You know, it really was the nicest prison I've ever been at. It just had like a different vibe. It didn't feel like prison. He's like, why don't you just take care of it yourself? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, why don't you just beat this guy up? I'm like, okay. What does he look like? And he's like, well, he's right over there. He points to Cowboy. I'm not exaggerating. Cowboy is like 6'5", 280 pounds of all muscle. He looks like The Rock. Shaved head. Looks like the meanest guy ever. I'm 5'6". I'm like 190 pounds of kind of fat, a little bit more shape than I was, but I'm still not in good shape. And I look over at him, I'm like, oh my God, I've run my mouth about this guy to like the entire prison. I'm like, fuck. He's like, yeah, you still want to beat that guy up? I mean, this guy could literally just squeeze my head like a zit and just destroy me. He was like a gargantuan beast. I'm like, fuck. There I go running my mouth, thinking that people would care. Nobody cared. And now it's going to be the kind of situation where it's like one-on-one, and this guy is going to squeeze me like I'm a grape or something. So I don't really know what to do. I kind of go put the bad paperwork in my cell, and people start showing me this place. They show me the weight pile. The weight pile they have is like the size of Gold's Gym. It's amazing. They have this incredible indoor gym, indoor basketball courts. They have a hobby craft. They even have a pool hall at this place, and they have the XM radio that plays out of the TVs. Like, this place is sweet. That and El Reno in Oklahoma, those are the two sweetest FCIs in all federal prison. So I start getting adjusted. I'm looking, Taco, like I'll go into the cell and he's just sitting there cross-legged, sitting in like a chair, like looking at a color porn magazine. That he's like, hey man, did you check out the weight stuff? With his gold grill. He just looked ridiculous. And I really wanted to get out of that cell, and I ended up moving in with this skinhead dude named Steve, who became one of my really good friends. But I was stuck with Taco for a couple weeks, and I must have been there like 2 or 3 days. And I remember I went to lunch, I grabbed my tray, and I go sit down. Now, at this prison, the whites all sit in the same section, but people sit in cars. So there's the Iowa car. There's the Nebraska car. There's the Florida car, the New York car. There's the California car. And me and this other white guy are like the only two white guys from California. So I go sit at that table because I knew that that's where I was supposed to be sitting. And I'm just sitting there by myself. And I'm kind of sitting there eating with, everything there's a spork. And a spork is like a hybrid spoon fork. And I'm sitting there eating my like bullshit fed meal. I'm eating it and I just hear a tray slam down in front of me. And I'm like, I look up and it's Cowboy. And he's just like, just snarling. And I was like, yes? And he's like, hey man, sits down, he's like, hey, I heard you said I was a rat. Why you say I'm a rat, man? I was like, because you are a rat. I'm a rat. Like, instantly I saw it what time this guy was on. Anybody that big that you're calling a rat to, I mean, I was like prepared to get beat up. I was going to fight back, but I was definitely prepared for this guy to swing on me. But he's like, me, a rat? I'm like, look, man, I have paperwork on you. I was just at Victorville. You testified against my friend Brian. Gave him 30 years. You just had a kid. You should be fucking ashamed of yourself. Fucking rat piece of shit. And like, now I'm starting to say it a little louder. The entire chow hall is like kind of looking. They're like, oh my God. And Cowboy's like, I want to see this paperwork. I don't believe that it's real. I believe it's doctored. I'm like, yeah, man. Yeah. Somebody smuggled a fucking laptop up their asshole and made fake paperwork saying you're a rat. You fuck somebody's life over, you're a piece of shit. Get out of my face, dude. And he like got up, he's like, and just left. I'm like, Jesus, what a bitch. Like, at this point, I'm not saying I'm tough. I'm not saying I'm hard. But I was getting way more fearless, It's like all the life experiences and all the stress I'd been. It's like my whole mentality at this point is how much worse can it get? And I had really bought into the whole image reputation thing of prison. And instantly people were like, praising me for it. They're like, man, you checked that rat. And like the funniest part about it is like 3 days later, I'm sitting in my cell reading a book, tacos, and they're like, hey, maybe we should go to the gymnasium later tonight. And I'm sitting there reading a book, and Cowboy comes in, he's like, hey, Leone, I'm making some burritos tonight, dog. Do you have any cheesy rice you can throw in on it? I'm like, nah, I'm cool, dude. I don't want to, like, make spreads with you. You ratted my friend out. What the fuck? And so at this point, I started making friends with some of the Soreños and some of the Norteños. They're all from California. And I'd never really been around Norteños before, I didn't know much about them. I knew that they ran with the blacks. At this particular prison, they were running with Southsiders. And I think it's because they had to form numbers against the Latin Kings and the Vice Lords and all these other gangs, and they just wanted their numbers to be bigger. And the blacks that were out there that were active gang members weren't backing up the Norteños. So the Northerners and Southerners got together, and I started befriending some Northerners. And I remember I was sitting in my cell one day. I've been there like a week now, and I'm just starting to chop it up with some of the Norteños and stuff that are in my unit, because they're like from the Bay Area or from Sacramento, whatever. And one of them came up to me and he said, hey man, let me get at you real quick. I was like, what's up? He's like, hey, we just got a huila, which is a kite, little message, and we're gonna take off on these scraps. Scraps is like a derogatory word for Southsiders. He's like, we're gonna take off on these scraps. And busters is a derogatory term for Norteños. So Southsiders call Norteños busters, and Norteños call Southsiders scraps. So he's like, hey, we're gonna take off on these scraps. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I guess our little treaty or truce or whatever made it okay for them to program together at this prison had like expired. And he's like, you wanna be on the team or what? And I was like, I'm not a Norteño, I'm not a Soreño. Like, I'm a white boy from Santa Barbara. I have nothing to do with it. And he's like, well, I'm just letting you know out of respect, because we're from the same state, that tomorrow, right after 4 o'clock count, it's going to crack off. between us and the Southsiders. And I was like, all right, well, I appreciate you letting me know. He's like, you sure you don't want to ride with us? It'll be appreciated. I'm like, nah, it's got nothing to do with me, man. I'm not from a neighborhood. I'm not a northerner or a southerner. From a tourist town. I got shop work. That's not me, man. He's like, all right, cool. So I knew that it was going to crack off the next day, right after the 4 o'clock count. And we will get into that in part 19 of my 5 years in federal prison. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please press subscribe, like, comment, palabra if that was a button, and have a good night. I will see you again tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.